This happened yesterday. And below the masthead, Arise TV panelist loud Nigerians handling of pandemic. One of tougher days ahead. The story starts from the front page and it continues on page 10. Then above the masthead, federal government directs oil firms to cut offshore workforce. NNPC, DR differ over Nigeria's petrol stock. The story starts from the front page and it continues on page 18. And the last story on this day newspaper, ASU demands 1.1 trillion naira for universities revitalization. The story can be found on page 8. We go to the next paper for review this morning, which is the Leadership newspaper, and I'll take it below the masthead. Zenith commits 200 and I think that story 3 billion naira. Keystone 1 billion naira. Tinubu 200 million naira to combat COVID-19. The story starts from the front page and it continues on page 7. On page 8, Osibajo, APC governors extol Tinubu's virtues at 68. That story is on page 8. Then the lead story says coronavirus. President Muhammadu Buhari locks down Abuja, Lagos, Ogun. The Kickers has this, says it's a matter of life and death. Exempt telecoms, media, health, security, electricity workers from 14-day shutdown. Approves 2 months conditional cash transfer for vulnerable Nigerians. Suspends all flight operations. Residents of satellite towns to get relief materials. Israel evacuates 274 nationals from Nigeria. Confirms cases in Nigeria now 111. The story can be found on page 4. We have enough fuel for 60 days, says NNPC. Hands medical equipment over to Uni Abuja Hospital. The story starts from the front page and it continues on page 4. Then the bottom strip stories on page 14. Abakari confirms testing positive for COVID-19. That story is on page 14. And on page 10, troops kill bandits, rescue kidnapped victims in Zamfara. NSCDC alerts Nigerians on new antics of car thieves. The story can be found on page 8. And on page 2, which is the last story on this paper, NIMASA bans foreign vessels without terminal screening facilities. That's it on Leadership newspaper. We go to the next paper, which is New Telegraph newspaper, and I'll take it from the top. Ruwen, recession now inevitable in Nigeria. Economists, we can't escape economic crisis due to COVID-19. The story starts from the front page and it continues on page 6. On page 29, PDP tells federal government to reduce fuel price to 90 naira. And below the masthead, Air Peace evacuates 274 Israelis from Lagos and Abuja. This story can be found on page 6. And on page 7, military identifies set ablaze 13 bandits' home in Zamfara. That's on page 7. Kwara governor donates 10 months salary to combat virus COVID-19. You can find the details on page 5. And on page 10, Dangote to establish 600-bed isolation center in Kano. That is on page 10. Then the lead story on New Telegraph newspaper, coronavirus. Buhari shuts down Lagos, Abuja, Ogun for 14 days. Orders closure of businesses. Bans movement from 11 p.m. today, that's Monday. Exempt seaports, petrol stations, orders. Promises relief materials. Abakari moves to Lagos for additional tests and observation. You can see the details on page 4. We have these COVID-19 cases in Nigeria. So far, 12 states are affected, with Lagos having the highest case so far. This is the map to show that. And below the picture, COVID-19 hits UI as CMD. Provost deputy test positive. Immigration boss 2. How UCH chief professors got infected. See the story on page 10. And the last story on this paper for review. Too much salt could weaken immune system. See the details on page 30. Next is Nigerian Tribune, and I'll take it from the lead story. COVID-19. Buhari locks down Lagos, Ogun, Abuja. This is a matter of life and death. It has the kickers. Direct cessation of all movements from 11 p.m. today for 14 days. All businesses, offices to be fully closed. Plans on to sustain school feeding program. 3-month repayment moratorium for all trader money, market money, farmer money loans in place. Similar moratorium put in place for all federal government funded loans by Bank of Industry, Bank of Agriculture and Maxim Bank. 2-month food ration for IDPs. See details on page 5. And we have this from NCDC Molecular Laboratory Network. This is a map showing the laboratories of the Nigerian Center for Disease Control, NCDC, with capacity to test for COVID-19. The bottom strip stories. UCHCMD, College of Medicine Provost, Deputy, Immigration CG test positive. See the story on page 4. And on page 28, Onitsha Bridge shut. Fayemi Oyetola orders lockdown in Ekiti and Osun State. The details can be found on page 5. And on page 13, Air Peace evacuates 274 Israelis out of Lagos and Abuja airports. The last story above the masthead is a front page editorial. COVID-19, the unraveling of the Nigerian elite. Alright, that story starts from the front page and it continues on page 13. Right about now, we pause here to go for a short break. When we return, newspaper review continues with more stories. Please stay tuned.
Not that I mean to undermine polytechnics, they do a good job, but university education is actually more valuable.
What teacher is supposed to do is to identify those people that are very, very slow in learning.
When you discover your child is not performing well in a particular subject, it's for you to encourage the child and find out ways to assist.
Don't give respect to the school in which you graduated from. What I see in you and I Express is what you can offer. And this is what polytechnic education equipped the graduate with.
There's no longer white-collar jobs. They are nowhere to be found. The population is increasing on a daily basis and the government cannot provide all the needed jobs for the boarding youths.
It's the doctor that the patient has to get a prescription for. The reason is that when the patient comes, the patient gets a card and is directed to see the physician.
Viewers, let's get to the rest of the papers for review this morning. We continue from the Guardian newspaper and I'll take it from the top below the masthead. Global shortage of testing capacity. Ventilators threaten efforts to contain COVID-19. See details on page 14. And on page 5, Immigration CG tests positive for COVID-19. COVID-19. Experts predict new wave of mortgage defaults. See the story on page 19. Concerns mount over underground water pollution in Lagos communities. See the details on page 24. And the lead story has this. Buhari shuts down Lagos, Abuja, Ogun for 14 days. Orders The story starts from the front page and it continues on page 8. All right. Why 5 million metering gap may persist? Import charges. COVID-19 worsens situation. Import charges. COVID-19 worsens situation. Enugu, Ikeja, Jos, Kano Discos unable to account for rollout. Implementation stalls in Adamawa, Taraba, Borno and Yobe. The story starts from the front page and it continues on page 8. We have this picture: full compliance with the closure of worship houses to check the spread of COVID-19 virus at the 100,000 seater capacity Dunamis Church Airport Road in Abuja. This happened yesterday. The second picture is the Kaduna residents queuing to collect cash and food items at Nurayi village in Kaduna. Alright, we go to the next paper for review, the Blueprint newspaper. I'll take it from the top beside the masthead. We have 60-day fuel sufficiency. This is coming from NNPC. The story can be found on page 14. Council Africa's debts. Oxfam tells G20. The story can be found on page 29. And below the masthead, Tinubu are rallying point. APC governors declare. Ashwaju a bridge builder. Nationalist. This is coming from Lawan and Sonwolu. The story starts from the front page and it continues on page 6. Pastor arrested. 14 churches closed in the Federal Capital Territory. The story can be found on page 5. And the lead story says, as COVID-19 cases rise to 111, Buhari locks down Lagos, Abuja, Ogun for 14 days. Effective 11 p.m. Monday. Gives 3-month grace to repay trader money. Orders. Immigration boss, UCHCMD, UI College Provost positive. German minister commits suicide. NNPC orders donate $30 million. Buhari's address didn't address nation's concern. This is coming from PDP and the story can be found on page 6. Alright, the picture is that of President Muhammadu Buhari addressing the nation over the COVID-19 pandemic at the State House, Abuja. This happened yesterday. And the second picture is that of the 110-bed isolation center constructed by the Lagos State Government and GTB at Mobola G. Johnson Stadium in Lagos. This happened on Saturday. And the bottom strip stories: Gombe suspends new minimum wage to review budgets. That story can be found on page 15. And on that same page, COVID-19, security operatives disrupt wedding. Guests dispersed in Abuja. Federal government evacuates stranded NCDC staffs from Congo, Brazzaville. The story can be found on page 5. And on page 14, KB commissioners contribute 50% salaries for COVID-19. And the last story on Blueprint newspaper, NIMASA bans international vessels without screening facilities. The story can be found on page 28. And we have the Business Day newspaper for review this morning. It leads with this story: Lagos, Abuja, Ogun on 14-day lockdown as federal government moves to contain coronavirus spread. Media, health workers, others essential service exempted. Buhari announces 3 months moratorium payment of trader money and orders. See details on page 38. Nigerians' private sector fight to curb coronavirus shows that economy is missing. The story starts from the front page and it continues on page 38. An inside story: Nigeria's political elites stuck with country's neglected healthcare system. The story can be found on page 4. And the picture is that of an isolation center being built by Access Bank and Aliko Dangote Foundation at Obagada General Hospital in partnership with Lagos State government. And that concludes our review for this morning. That's how far we can go on today's edition of Newspaper Review. Thank you for joining us on the show. Remember that hope and miracles are on the way, and this trying moment will soon fade away. Stay positive and stay safe. Bye-bye.
The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, the expert body on coronavirus, has released guidance for general public and healthcare professionals on the symptoms of the virus. A person could be at risk if they have any or all of the following: